one gift, I think, would be for them to know, for everybody to know, that they are magnificent beings of light.
Beautiful.
And that we're all the same, that we all are magnificent beings of light, love and light, yeah. I think that oneness, that recognizing that we are one, and we genuinely are, not just humans too, it's like, you know, every ant and every tree, you know, every plant, we are all made of the same stuff, you know. Yeah, we are one. Yeah, because I think if we lived that, it would change the world. Yeah, you know.
Okay.
To me, it's like experiencing and understanding in a much fuller way oneness. You know, I realized that it was a theory, and I knew it, and I thought I knew it, and what have you. This is experiencing worlding and presencing in a way that, as I say, to me it's on another level.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary work. You know, I think it's appreciating life. You know, I've faced some challenges where life wasn't guaranteed at all. And just to be alive is such a gift. And yeah, I'm just very content now, which in itself is a gift. Yeah. So normally in summer I would get up fairly early and go to the beach, go for a walk, get back in time for meditation, because I always feel if I can go to the sanctuary for that 20 minutes in the morning, life works better for me. And you know, I work with people. I'm quite busy normally, and in that meditation I go through who I'm seeing for the day and connect with them, go through what I'm probably feel into each of them, and that inspires me. It inspires me to feel as though I'm making a difference, and that I've had a varied and very full life, and that others can benefit from that. I can help others through challenges that I've been through. So I think that inspires me more than anything else, is that I feel as though I'm making a difference. Yeah. And being part of Findhorn, because of John, and he's been there for a long time, my partner, ever since I've got more involved with him and his work, because he was very involved for a long time, so I assisted quite a lot. And I had insights into the community, you know, more than I would have otherwise, and that I'm grateful for. It's been a wonderful experience. Yeah. And through lockdown, you know, I've said to John a few times, I just feel so blessed to live where we do, and for us to be able to walk to the beach throughout lockdown because it was exercise. You know, I really feel for the people that were locked up inside somewhere. Yeah, so yeah, I do. I just feel incredibly grateful. I feel too, you know, that I've lived in 2 countries, and I've really lived in 2 countries, not just visited them. And that feels like a great privilege too, to be able to call both home in a way. So I sort of tend to take, when I'm in South Africa, I tend to bring from Findhorn parts of myself and parts of Findhorn, and when I come back I bring parts of South Africa, you know, and I think it benefits both. And benefits me. That's
great. Water
all right.
taken care of.
Do you know, I did a vision quest in South Africa about 4 years ago now, probably, I can't remember, which was amazing, absolutely amazing. I'd highly recommend it. It was 11 days, quite a long one, a long time, but we had 4 days in the mountains, they called it, and all you had was water. And you weren't allowed to take in anything that wasn't your own creation. So you could take in pens and paper, and crayons. You could take a musical instrument, but you couldn't take any books. You couldn't take anybody else's thoughts, basically. And I'm so glad about that. So I wouldn't take a book or anybody else's experience, but I would take stuff to write with, because I found it's really was important to write. I wrote and wrote and wrote things I never expected to even think of. You know, I sort of wrote to, as though I, at my funeral, all the letters that would be read out to all the people in my life that I was grateful for. So to school teachers that had had an influence on my life, and my siblings and my parents, and, you know, all, you name it. I wrote letters, and that was extraordinary. It was an amazing experience. I wrote songs and sang them, and yeah, that 4 days on your own, without a watch, without any technology, and taking in nothing apart from water and sleeping bag. You know, I was warm. I found a cave, and I stayed in a cave. Yes, you know, I think because of my partner John, you know, when I was really ill and I came through that, some of my thinking was I might move back to South Africa. You know, my younger child was there then. And then more and more, as John and I got together, this felt more and more and more like home.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, yeah, I'm completely settled and very grateful to be living in Findhorn. I mean, it feels like, I don't know, we live in the middle of the park, in the middle of the community, and sometimes that's intense, but it's great. I really feel we have wonderful neighbors. So much goes on. Even during COVID, it felt like we were being held in a community. Yeah, it was great. Yeah. When my life had turned around, my mom had died, and I had inherited some money that was unexpected at that time, and I suddenly had the money because she phoned to say, I'm putting a course together, a trip to go to Peru, following the ancients. And something inside of me just went click, bang. I had read Shirley MacLaine's book. I'd seen the movie Out on a Limb, going to Peru. And it just, something happened, and I said yes. So I went to Peru with 4 of us. I didn't know any of them really. This person who put it together had been on this course. And she was amazing in that she was highly intuitive. She spoke to a being that she connected to, and we'd ask things. We'd come to a ruin in Peru, and she would get the download of what used to happen there, and then we would find, the guide would come in and say, oh, well, you know, we think that this used to happen, and the sun used to come through here at this time, and they used to do sacrifices here, and she'd already told it all to us. So it was confirmed. It was quite extraordinary. And we were doing things and being things like, it was like on another level, completely. It was like stuff that, as you say, people don't talk about because it was so bizarre. And so, you know, we saw a UFO and, you know, things people won't believe you. And at Machu Picchu, we stayed overnight. And in those days, this is quite a few years back, many years ago, there was a very small hotel at the top, and the ruin hadn't been opened for that long. And the tourists all came up by bus. I don't know if you've ever been there, but you know, it's a windy, windy road out of the jungle, and there's this incredible ruin. I mean, the energy up there is quite amazing. Machu Picchu is something else. And The ruin was amazing, but there are lots of tourists. And all the tourists left after lunch, and we had the ruin to ourselves. I mean, it was like a miracle. It was incredible. And as I was going to sleep, we were having a nap in the afternoon. Each had our own room. We'd got up at 4 in the morning to get there. And I had a being knocking on my head. I was about to go to sleep, and I had the word in my head as though something was knocking on the inside of my head. And it was the words Metatron, Metatron. And I opened my eyes and looked around and said, yes, it's like, where are you, who are you, I had no idea, didn't know who that was. And I said, it was asking permission to come through. And I said, yes, okay. And he said, well, never mind now. You go to sleep. I'll talk to you later. So later in the afternoon, I went and sat on the top of Machu Picchu, and I said, okay, I'm ready. And Metatron came through, talked to me, and I said, well, I don't want my life to change at that stage. I had only sort of fairly recently heard about channeling. I'd been to a Lazarus 4-day intensive on that trip, which was amazing. It was all a little bit intimidating, if I could put it that way. And I was a little bit like, And I said, no, I don't want my life to change. He said, well, that's fine, but it was totally on my terms. But it seemed a little bit far out. And when I came back from America, having had this incredible trip, on another planet, I lost a little bit of trust in the whole experience, in that this person who we went with, as I got to know, I saw how she sometimes colored what she got. And I realized that it was like her filters definitely influenced what she was getting. And I lost my confidence in channeling, I suppose, in a way. And I think it was probably a good thing. I realized how much ego was involved. I think a person has to be very centered and very clear in order for what comes through to be real. And the channels that have lasted and whose stuff is so extraordinary and influenced the world, I think have proved that. That there are some incredible ones around. And Eileen was one like that, and Dorothy. So, Dorothy's had a big influence on my life. I've got to know her. I got to know her well. And watching the way that she led her life, that's to me what it's about. It's how a person lives.
And the sort of example they put out there.
Yeah. That's more important than what people say. It's how they live. So I think in a way that's been my motto, It's not what you teach, it's how you walk the talk. Yeah.
Good one. I like that. So
Do you know,
did you love
the Japanese maple outside the hall in its different seasons? I love that. And I love that cherry tree outside the hall as well. When that's in full bloom and blossom, to stand under that is just like, wow, it's amazing. I am drawn to the pebbles on the beach. Those pebbles, when I came over to Findhorn from South Africa, that's what I took back. I took back 10 white pebbles. And by then I was on a spiritual path, and I gave those to people. And for them to have a stone from Findhorn Beach was the best gift I could give anyone. So yes, that has a special place for me. Being on the beach and looking across the Firth to the mountains I find that extraordinary. I love that. I love our beach. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of trees and a lot of plants that I love. I have a very special feeling for and talk to sometimes, but I think it's the beach that calls me. I think by then I had done a lot of group work. I had been on courses. I'd learned to meditate. I had done some pretty challenging spiritual growth stuff. And I did Experience Week. I found it quite mild. I didn't find it as challenging as it does for some people. But what impressed me and had a huge impact was the work departments and my time. I worked in the kitchen, and that to me was mind-boggling. How it worked so calmly. I mean, you know, that impressed me hugely. And then later I worked in home care, and cleaning toilets has never been the same since. You know, love and action. Yeah. To me, that's the magic of Findhorn community. It was really learning what love and action was, and that everything I do, I can do with love, and it changes everything. So that was the big thing, I think, that surprised me about the community. Yeah. And it stuck.
It does. It doesn't go away. It just gets deeper and deeper, doesn't it? Yeah.
Do you know, I had some amazing experiences when I was ill. I mean, you know, I was facing death and I was really ill. I was not expected to live. And I had some incredible experiences. I remember once having the sensation, I only really realized afterwards, of my body getting long in the middle of a therapy session. And my body seemed to be getting long. I realized afterwards I was leaving my body through my head. That's why my body was getting longer. And I was rocked in the lap of God. How I knew it was God, I have no idea. And I appeared to be that small, that I could fit. It was like being on a grown-up's lap. But I was being rocked like a baby. And it was like being completely reassured. It was extraordinary. So I had many. One of them, when I knew I was getting better, I had one amazing experience. I mean, I had a few, but the biggest one, I think, was I realized that by this stage I knew I was getting better. And something happened when the therapist got to my heart area. Something exploded in my head. It was like having a fireworks going off in my head. And I started shaking. It felt almost as though I was levitating. My whole body went stiff and I was shaking. And Chetsa turned my arms over and I'm lying there on this couch like that, shaking. And a voice in my head said, "This is my son in whom I'm most pleased." And I responded, "Daughter, you mean?" in my head. And there was this chuckle and said, "Oh, child, then." And I know that I had a download then, but I don't remember what. And I call that my Christ experience, and that's why I knew that I was having that, because of those words. And that was what prompted me to be part of the group that organized the Antichrist Consciousness event.
Right.
And that was why I walked the Camino with the intention of finding out more about what Christ consciousness actually was. So, yeah, that had a big impact. So I call it my Christ experience, and it did. It was, I think, a type of initiation, and a big happening in my life. Yeah. But other than that, I would say it's my kids. My kids have inspired me.
Yeah.
You know.
They're the best teachers.
They are. I mean, you know, they are. I mean, my youngest son looked after me when I was ill, and he was 23, and we had an amazing time together. I mean, it was tough for him and tough for me at times, very. And my older one, Paddy, came up, and he would bring some lightness when he arrived. But yeah, I think Alistair's probably been one of my biggest teachers in my life. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Organisation.
It was big too because of what it was about. You know, and everybody's idea of what Christ consciousness is, it's like, you know, something quite different.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that until I actually got in with people that I thought of as being quite spiritual. In fact, I walked the Camino, and
the Camino de Santiago.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I walked that.
When did you do that?
2011.
Great.
And my intention for doing it was to learn more about Christ consciousness, knowing this conference was coming up. So I walked with that intention. And my only answer always was that it's love. I couldn't get any deeper than that. I couldn't get any more words. I was looking for more words and more understanding, but that was all I ever got, you know. So, and it was great. And I'd been very ill, and it was sort of like a coming out for me of knowing that I was back on track well enough to do that, because it was, I mean, I walked 25 days the first time. I had to come back to move house and go to America, and then came back and went back to the same place, Ponferrada, and walked to Santiago and then to Finisterre. Yeah, so yeah, I did the whole thing, but in 2 sections. Yeah, it was a great experience. Once I got into it, once I was over my exhaustion, you know, once I was fit enough on that first Camino, and, you know, I wasn't getting blisters and things, you know. So I don't think I've ever felt so good by the end of that. I felt like I was young again. I remember walking out one morning early, you know, it was almost like an animal, you know, where you see a cheetah or something walking and their limbs all work, you know. And that's how I felt. I felt as though fluid, and my body was just moving. It's worth all the angst and everything, you know, of being exhausted to get to that point. Yeah. It felt incredibly satisfying. Yeah. So who knows? Who knows? Who knows where this world's going? Who knows in a year or two, you know? And yeah, I'm 75 this year, so it's like, who knows? Who knows what life will be? But yeah, I have a vision of, you know, walking on the earth in a way that is bringing my awareness and my love, and walking on the earth in a way that is very conscious. It's, I think it's along those lines. Yeah. Beautiful. I mean, we suddenly the other day talked about walking. John and I have walked a lot. This has been the first time we've had no long-distance walks. And we drove through New Zealand, South and North Island, quite a few years ago, and it was just a thought of walking there. Nice. Don't know how far, but, you know, we've sort of got to the point where we don't carry all our stuff on our back anymore. We sort of send the stuff ahead a little bit more than we used to. But I was part of a 2-year group that worked on a conference called Antichrist Consciousness. And I was part of the group that organized that. There were 7 of us that organised that whole event, and that was big because we were from very different backgrounds in our thinking and in our spirituality. And we turned over every word on things like our posters, on our pamphlets, on our everything. I mean, we met for every week for 2 years. 1 week we'd have a meditation, and the next week we'd have admin, you know. But we talked through, you know, moving and away from the old Christianity into what I called Christ Consciousness. And it brought up a lot of stuff for all of us. It was big. So yes, I was part of that for 2 years. Do you know, I grew up on a farm, which in South Africa. And I think being South Africa too, and growing up in South Africa with huge diversity of culture and languages and colour, and you know, it really is a rainbow nation. And I had 4 older brothers and sisters, and I was number 5, and I had 1 younger than me. So I grew up in a family of 6. So I was continually, you know, there was a lot of competition in our family. And growing up on a farm, I had a very outdoor experience, which was wonderful because it was warm in South Africa where I was. And I think that led to thinking outside the box and not necessarily have to have too many rules. And I learned to look after myself. I had parents, particularly a mother, who never said, be careful. So I was free to explore. It never entered my head that I would fall. I would climb the highest trees, I would do everything. I had a brother 18 months older than me who I competed with. So on the tennis court, we had our own court at home, which my father built out of sand. And I competed, you know, and I learned to hold my own in that way. And then I went to boarding school, and I was very well coordinated, basically. I think I grew up, had those sorts of genes. And that, I think, stood me in good stead. So I was very good at sport. I played internationally, eventually tennis-wise. And I learned, not only in tennis, but in other sports. You know, I played squash casually and then eventually at high league level. I learned to be tough when the going got tough, you know, and to hold through. I really learned some deep inner strength through my sport and through being at a boarding school and things like that. And so when I was really, really ill and I was in huge pain, and I think some people might have given up, I didn't know what giving up was. I honestly had never given up in a tennis match, and I'd never given up on the sports field. And that actually, and I had those examples too around me of people that actually did that. So, and growing up with black people as we did, as our friends, you know, we played on the farm with kids, you know. It was only when we were older that we learned what apartheid was. And you know, they had such an affinity with the earth and with animals and with each other and with children. There's a wonderful aspect that I treasure with black people, particularly the ones I knew in South Africa. And there's a constancy in them, which I learned too. So, yes, I think part of my upbringing had a lot to do with my inner strengths of holding steady, being able to hold steady when everything's falling around me.
And never giving up.
Yeah, never giving up. I think those are probably some of the aspects, yeah.
You know, or a book that you've
You know,
read.
I mean, I used to love the Winnie the Poohs.
Right.
I mean, you know, the wisdom in Winnie the Pooh is quite extraordinary, you know, and Piglet and Christopher Robin. I mean, yeah, I mean, the tale of Pooh, you know.
Yeah.
It really is a very deep and profound book,
Yes.
you know, actually,
Yeah.
if you read it in the right way.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think there are a lot of books like that we grew up with and had no idea how wise they were. Yeah. Yeah. And I think children's books, I think, is a very clever way of getting through messages to young children and to young people. Yeah. You know. And the other one, you know, is the Sarah books. Do you know the Sarah books, which is the Abraham? So,
Okay.
so it's, you know, it's the Abraham Hicks stuff.
Okay.
But for children.
Okay.
And such wisdom.
Yeah.
I mean, I could listen to those because they told as well as reading. You know, the wise being is Seth. Seth is the owl. And they build a tree house and they swing from the ropes, she and her friend. The sort of thing I used to love doing as a child. We had a tree house, you know, in a tall tree. And the wind used to blow and we'd be okay up there, you know. So the Sarah books I would recommend to any parent for their children. They're three books. It's S-A-R-A.
Okay.
Without the H.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically vibration.
Right.
It's working with your vibration, and it's the law of attraction.
Okay.
So Abraham was is the being that comes through Esther Hicks.
Okay.
And Jerry Hicks used to ask the questions. Jerry died about 3 years ago.
Okay.
And Esther still continued.
Okay.
And in my own healing, somebody sent me the introduction to Abraham, and it played a big part in my healing, looking at my vibration. So, yeah, so this is the Sarah books, are all that wisdom but put into language that kids will understand and making it fun. And they're delightful, they really are, yeah. Yeah. But I started playing the guitar very badly with a book, not the right fingering or anything, and learned to strum, because I have a good ear, so I would find the chords and play. But then when I was at training college, I studied to be a teacher. I joined a group, and as I walked down the corridor for this audition, which a friend persuaded me, she went out with one of the guys, and I heard this music, and it sounded so professional. When I walked in, they said, "Hi, you know, do you play the guitar?" And I said, "No, I didn't." And no ways was I going to try and play guitar with them. They were absolute pros. And it was like, well, you know, do you know the song? I said, "No." Okay, well, we'll carry on singing. And can you harmonize? I said, "Well, a little." So they sang this song I'd never heard, and I tried to fit in a harmony, but I was sort of going la, la, la. And then they finished the verse, and they said, "Well, that sounded great. Can you do it a bit louder?" And I said, "Well, la, 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 but louder." and then they said, "Hey, no, hang on, let's find the words." And they found the music and the words, and now at least I had the words. So I was sort of going a little louder. And that was it. And they said, "You're on, you're in.
Right.
When can we practice?" That was a Tuesday. And on the Sunday, we sang. I had no idea any of this was going to happen. We sang at the university, which was the end of their RAG, which was their fundraising. In the hall, there were 1,000 people there, and they had all the top folk people from around the country flown down to Pietermaritzburg. And there we were, the three of us. I'd never sung on a stage with lights or mics or anything. And we frantically found a name, and we dressed and things. The guys had done it, but I hadn't. And we learned 4 songs. We'd only practiced twice before this. We learned 4 songs. Our voices blended perfectly. It was amazing. Yeah. And everybody shouted for more, but we didn't know anymore, so we walked off. That's how it started. So
you got that inner strength again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. So I sang quite a lot all over the place, you know, with these guys, and it was such fun. Yeah. It was like such fun. We'd have hootenannies on the beach, and it was terrific. It was a great world, actually. The music world was such fun in those days. The old folk scene, you know, it was great. Yeah, it was,
great story.
Yeah, that was a whole fun. I remember somebody asking me, I did an amazing course once. I've done a lot, but I did an amazing life-changing course that was based on the old EST trainings in America. It was the I Am courses, and mine was a branch of that I did. And we did one thing which we were blindfolded. It was all made to seem very real. It was going to be a shipwreck.
It was like an exercise.
This was an exercise, yeah, when we'd well into the course. And there were about 25 of us doing it. We were blindfolded. We were told that we were shipwrecked. We were going to be shipwrecked. And we had to stand up and say why we should be saved, because there were only room for 4 on the lifeboat. I was really real by then. And it was really what came through. And what came through me was I've seen my own light, and I want to help others see theirs. And that still remains, you know. I think that was what I realized, was that I do know that I am light, but I know that everybody else is, and I want them to know that, yeah. So I'd say that still stays all these years later.